And I remember sitting in a car park with my wife. We were going somewhere, and I said, honestly, Angie, I've got to pull over because I'm more worried about it. So, and I phoned David Cameron on his mobile, Prime Minister, and I said, I just desperately need to talk to you. I'm not happy. I'm going to resign. And he said, I can't talk to you at the moment, but I'll give you a call back in half an hour. And to be fair to David, he did give me a call back in half an hour, and I explained to him exactly what was going on. And he said, next reshuffle, I'll move you to an operational job. I said, no, you don't have to do that, I'll go. And he went, no, I want to keep you. And I went to do police and criminal justice.
I am back in Parliament with Sir Mike Penning in his office right here in the heart of Westminster. And I'm chuffed actually today to speak to Mike because we first met a few years ago when you were Minister for the Armed Forces and I was working at the MOD and you were doing a covenant signing. So how are you? What's gone on since then?
Well, then I was Min-AF, Deputy Secretary of State for Defence, which I'm going to assure you the chiefs weren't very happy with because I didn't make corporal when I was in. But the only job I ever really wanted to do in government is to be a minister. And once you've been a minister, then there's only one true operational job, and that's Min-AF. All the other jobs I was at police, I was at justice, Northern Ireland, but really operational. Min-AF is the answer to that. So when the Prime Minister asked me to move again, I politely said I didn't want to move. And she said, well, if you don't move, Mike, I might have to sack you. And I said, see you later.
Just like that?
Yeah, you've got to hold your principles. When they sent me there, it was aspirational. I asked to go there because I wanted people to realise that I didn't go to public school, I didn't go to university. I left school when I went in the army at 16. So I wasn't enormously successful as an infantryman or even as a paramedic when I was in the RMC. But I wanted them to see that you could actually, whether by luck or judgment or when they'll get up that greasy pole a little bit, move on in life, aspirational life. And every time I visited a unit, I went out, with the one rifles or 16-hour assault before I sent them to South Sudan, they literally said, well, when did you go to Sandhurst, Mike? Even now the King, when I was knighted, actually, when I met him the first time after Buncefield in my constituency, said, oh, I see you got a brigade tie on, Mike, when did you go to Sandhurst? And I had to say, I didn't make corporal. So it was, when she said I wanted to move you again, there's nothing I wanted to do more than actually look after our boys and girls, and that was the end of my ministerial career.
And I think that's why I was desperate to get you on the show, to be fair, because that aspirational story is something I can really relate to because, like you, I'm not commissioned, never have been, got lots of friends that are. People have, when I worked in politics, for example, putting the suit on, following MPs around, and you mention your military and they see a tie,
yes,
they go, oh, when you're at Sandhurst. And, well, I actually wasn't. Guess what? By the way, people that don't hold a commission also can do good stuff in life. Yes. So your story of aspiration was really important for me to get on this podcast because still today, 2/3 of our parliament, of about the 50 or so MPs that have been in the military, are ex-officers. And that balance isn't just right.
Well, when I joined in 2005, I'd worked in Parliament before, but when I became the MP in 2000, I was the only member of the House from the ranks. Now, it's got better, but it's still appalling that people don't feel, and it's as simple as that really, don't feel that they're good enough to put themselves forward and say, actually, I'd like to serve again, serve my country, because you swear allegiance, in my case, to the King and the Queen in Parliament. You don't feel that you've got that, luck or the ability, or you come from the wrong birth group or something. It's tosh. Actually, if you stick your name down and have a go, you never know what's going to happen. Look at me.
And that's why someone will listen to this and they'll really identify with that. They might have their own doubts. They deselect themselves, might just be, going for local government, for example, and think, oh, I wasn't an officer, it's an officer's sport. Absolute nonsense. And that's what I want. That's part of the objective of what I do with Campaign Force and this podcast. But you've alluded to your military service, and that service continued into the fire service as well. How do you look back? I'm also a Northern Ireland veteran. I know that you did a lot of your time, that was your operational focus in particular when you were in the military. But how do you reflect all these years later on that uniform service?
It shapes your life. Even to this day, I went to Northern Ireland in 75. Captain Nyrek, Robert Nyrek, was my captain. He wasn't with us. He was doing obviously other things.
Yeah.
I was in Keeley in Middletown during that time. Anybody that served with me, I'm no hero. And this is the correct. I mean, I was not even. As I keep saying to everybody, I'm not a good guardsman because I didn't like drill, But having done boy service for a year and then going into Chelsea Barracks, I know enough drill. So I applied for every course known to man. So if there's anybody serving at the moment, apply for courses and go. Because, for instance, I've got HGV. If I wasn't in this job, I got my HGV when I was in the military. There are hundreds of jobs out there at the moment, very good, well-paid jobs. So unless you challenge yourself. And I think coming into Parliament or standing in local government, or even challenge yourself in your whatever job you're in now, is actually what you should do. And the military, I think, for me, allowed me to challenge myself rather than the other way around. So look at the end of the telescope, which is actually the positive end. Look, I sat at home, and I was head of news and media for the Conservative Party at the time. And my wife's an Essex girl, she's very blunt, and I won't tell you exactly what she said, but I was whinging about John Major. And which is not unusual for me, and she's
whinging or just about John Major.
Both, and she said to me, "Look, get off your backside, a bit stronger than that, and do something about it, or shut up."
Yeah.
Now I want people listening to this and reviewing this to get off their backside and do something about it. Don't sit and whinge. Do something about it. You may not succeed. The chances of becoming an MP, there are basically 65 million people in the country and 650 MPs. So the chances are there, but unless you stick your name down there, mate, And I was chairman of candidates for a while, and I've made it more difficult because I wanted the right people to come through, but not the right people because they went to university or went to Eton or went to public school, but actually the right people because they've got experience in life. And the experience I had in Northern Ireland, and it's interesting, I went back as the counter-terrorism minister to Northern Ireland. Wow. And I remember saying to the Prime Minister David Cameron at the time, who sent me to Northern Ireland, you do realise I've served there, And very quickly after I arrived, the Belfast Telegraph said, that the IRA are saying that, or Sinn Féin are saying that you beat someone up, in Belfast in 1975. And I remember going back to the press officer saying, absolutely brilliant, thank you very much. I'll be going to Barbados every year for the next 10 years because we'll sue the pants off them. I never served in Belfast. My regiment never served in Belfast at any time. So we was always down there at Armagh. Of course, they shut up after that, and they didn't print anything. But if you've got the experience and the confidence, from the military, these days it's a lot different as well. I mean, when I was a minister, I used to go off. I remember so vividly this. I went to One Rifles in Northern Ireland, and there was a presentation to me about some particular project they were doing, and that presentation was done by a rifleman. That would never have happened. It'd have been a senior NCO or an officer who didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But instead of that, I had the guy who knew exactly what his job was, explaining to me in, rifleman's, private guardsman's language, and that to me was brilliant. That's the aspiration I wanted for our soldiers.
I think that's a fair observation because I was in Northern Ireland in 1998, I think. I was 18 at the time in Belfast, and only got down south a little bit. Well, for Drumcree actually for the marching season, but when I got back from Afghanistan as a 32-year-old Lance Corporal from the Army Reserve that had mobilised, I gave a presentation to my brigade as a Lance Corporal. Yeah. And I don't think that would have happened to Private Jonny Ball of 1 PWRR back in the day, coming back from tour.
One of the things I was desperate to make happen is that, to give people the courage and the confidence to actually talk about what their expertise was. And that doesn't necessarily mean you were the Lance Sergeant or the Company Sergeant Major or the Adjutant. I can assure you, in many cases when I was, say, in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s, that the officer was not the one to be actually briefing people properly, because they were never doing sentry duty on the border checkpoint in Middletown. They were, they were in there, but they weren't out there doing it. And so, they come out and tell you off about a few things, in polite terms. But actually, for me, the military have moved on. We have to be careful we don't move on too far, and with the AI and too much technical stuff, because we still need boots on the ground. Yeah. As you see that in Ukraine at the moment, where the military are the military. Oh, they've got some great kit out there, but actually the boots on the ground is what you need.
I think so, and I think they said about the Falklands War that it was a corporal's war, and there was this evolution of the thing called the strategic corporal. My experience in Afghanistan is probably the privates war, because you had young people not of rank but having to step up in isolated situations and show leadership. And so I think that's a cultural strength.
When I went to Iraq and Afghanistan during both the conflicts, and then post in Iraq, I mean, I was walking around Basra with Ian Duncan Smith as the leader of the opposition, and amazingly, it was perfectly safe to walk around Basra, and a few weeks later it wasn't. But that's a lot to do with the fact that we abolished the police force and things like that. So massive mistakes that were made in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I just think that so many guys were sent up to remote positions with not the senior officers around them, and they had to step up to the plate, and 99.9% of the time they did that, and that's why they can step up to the plate again now they're civvies. The hardest thing I ever did was when I came out. I mean, I came out and went back in literally almost simultaneously, mostly because like most squaddies, I fell in love with her when I was on leave. She told me all the right things. I told her all the right things. I bought the ticket, arrived home, and she was going out with someone else. And then she said, "Well, actually, I thought you dumped me anyway." So, like most guys and girls in the mob, relationships are difficult sometimes. And because I couldn't go home, I didn't get on well with my father. So you could only serve for a certain amount of time, and actually, I went back. And then I planned much more structurally when I came back, because I went into the fire brigade. I could have gone into police similarly, because I applied for both. But the confidence it gave me coming out of the military into semi-civilian, because there was a lot of ex-squaddies in the fire brigade these days. Sadly, these days that's not the case. And similarly with the police, there's very, very few comes out of the military and go into the police, unless they're like military police or something like that. That's wrong. I mean, it's not just about politics. We want to have the confidence to apply for the police, apply for the fire. Yeah. They're looking for you. If you all you got to do is apply, because they are looking for you to apply, because they want that sort of service commitment.
Yeah, and a friend of mine's just set up a association within the Met for the military, and I think, and he, again, not an officer, funny enough, but he did it before in commercial. He left the army, went into commercial, went to work for HS2, funny enough. Russ, big shout out for you, mate. And now he's rejoined uniform service in the Met, and he's sort of sought forgiveness afterwards and just set this thing up. And those pathways into these sectors, which are good fits, are really important. I think we need to revisit that, perhaps what we forgot about.
I agree, and I think one of the issues it was in my portfolio when I was in the Ministry of Defence, but one of the things I'm very conscious about, the average service of an infantryman is 3 to 6. Do they really rehabilitate you properly when you come back into civil service, civilian life? No, they don't. My PO box arrived, my wages went in the bank account, and frankly I got a phone call from a colour a couple of weeks later, but that's basically it. You do 22 years, they throw every course known to man at you. Actually, it's those 3 to 6 that we need to really support, because sadly they're the ones that actually, we've wrapped them in cotton wool, in inverted commas. We tend to sort our own problems out inside the military, don't we? And then they end up in trouble with the police or something like that, and the next minute they know they're in the prison service, and disproportionately too many of our boys and girls that are heroes one minute or in the nick the next minute. So we need to, and that's a lot to do that we've not tailored an environment for them as they come out, rather than just saying, well, you've only done 3 years, who cares? And that's kind of some of the attitude, I'm afraid.
And if it wasn't the case, we wouldn't have programmes like Op Nova set up in the criminal justice system.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, Jonny Mercer is absolutely doing his best to do this, but it's going to be as Jonny knows, a mindset change within the civilian services, particularly in the courts, as to how we actually help these people.
But in terms of that transition into the civilian world, you transitioned into journalism as well. Some people might see it as quite a leap from uniform service into journalism. What was that all about?
So I went to a job in the fire brigade in Brentwood in Essex. There was a small explosion, and anyway, I smashed my knee up, which the fire brigade were concerned that was going to be me out. I always had a bit of a back problem because I was airborne on a parachute. I did too many parachute jumps and landed badly. A lot of free fall, a lot of fun stuff, and a bit of frog heel stuff as well, which wasn't so great either. And I remember writing to my then MP. Don't know why. Someone must have suggested it to him, saying, like, I've served my country, but clearly they're going to turf me out the fire brigade. what do you think I should do? And he said, and he wrote back to me. I remember this vividly. The guy's name was Sir Tilly Taylor. Sadly passed away now. His son, actually, Colonel Taylor, was a Apache pilot until fairly recently. And he said to me in his letter, I don't know how I can help, but let's try. So I arrived here. I was still on crutches. Did a bit of work experience with him. I started writing his press releases for him. One of the journalists here, a guy called Henry O'Corey, on the Express, said, "Why, who's writing this? This is not Teddy's stuff." And I said, "No, it's me." He said, "Oh, but we've discussed it before, you're dyslexic, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I am dyslexic." He said, "But you write in a conversational way." I said, "Yeah, the spelling mistakes, and all that sort of stuff, grammar's appalling." He said, "But actually, that's exactly what, journalistically, we would be looking for." I started doing a bit of freelance for them. Ended up working for, freelance-wise, probably 8 or 9 of the national newspapers. And then after the John Wedgwood leadership election, where Teddy was supporting, I ended up being brought into central office as head of news and media, and the rest of it is history.
So just chance, accident, but also you made your own luck. That's not fit because you actually wrote to your MP that created that opportunity.
Well, I was desperate. I mean, I was just got married. I had a mortgage. Baby had just arrived, and I had the career that my wife thought I would be in until I was 55 when I retired in the fire brigade. She married a fireman. Now she's married to a retiring Knight of the Realm and a Privy Councillor.
So it's marry a fireman and wow, that's quite the journey. But on a serious point, you did make your own luck, and I think
you have to. But making your own luck is all about confidence. So if you're a guardsman, I just pick on a guard. When you're on the troop, we just watched the troop. You are absolutely know your job back to front. You know what you got to do. You've practiced it and practiced it and practiced it. So why, when you go into Civvy Street, do you not have the confidence to turn around and say, "I could do that"? And it's all it is. You might get a few knockbacks. Life is about knockbacks. Life is about winning and losing. But actually, if you know you're bloody good at that, why can't you be bloody good at something else? Just try. It worked for me. All those years later, I always say this to the kids when I go around school. Hands up, you think I kissed the Queen. I actually kissed the Queen when I became a Privy Councillor. Admittedly, it was the back of her hand, but it was bare skin, no gloves. It wasn't a snog, But I've kissed my Queen. Hey, and Prince Charles tried to chop my head off.
When he knighted you.
Yeah. we chatted away for absolutely ages, and eventually his military attaché came across and said, "There is a rather a long queue, Royal Highness," because I was the second one to be knighted. And it was an interim knighthood. It wasn't a birthday on this list or a New Year's on the list. So very proud day.
I bet. No, you must be proud. And in terms of the politics stuff, that began, you've seen through from the 1997 landside Labour election through the leadership of Hague, IDS. You've worked behind the scenes of politics, as you alluded to there, through working with your local MP. These days, I mean, how do you look back on the politics of then? And I mean, the word crisis gets thrown about, and you'd have lived those crises from Black Wednesday and political crises to the crises we're facing today. What's your analysis of that comparatively, looking back?
So I think within reason, the old sweats will say, "Well, we've seen it all before." And to be frank, we probably have. The analogy around us at the moment of whether it's close to where we was in '92, where Kinnock was 20 points ahead.
So you're talking about fortunes of the Conservative Party here, right?
But whether it be the fortunes of or politics in general, what comes round goes round. I mean, Blair was, love or hate him, was the consummate politician, and he had people like Brown around him who were the political antennae, really, especially during the early years. So what did they do? They loaded the Lords, even though they had a massive majority, because they knew at some stage they would be out of government. And while we sit here today, there will be, I think, 16 votes this afternoon on Lords' amendments to the illegal immigration bill. Why is that? Why did they kick it all back? Because Blair put them in there to actually cause problem for a future Conservative government. Now that sounds hugely party political, but it's actually true. And you have to be switched on to this. I mean, I remember talking to Ian Duncan Smith when he was the leader, and I was saying, how many have you put into the Lords? And because I was briefing on that, and I think we put 5 in that 6. I mean, Labour put about 27 in that time. You know, we couldn't do anything about it, but it was be aware of what's going on, and I think that's one of the things that we have to be aware of now.
So you're talking almost like an insurgency approach to politics there, thinking longer term.
Well, there is, if you look at something like Corbynism, and Corbyn lost and Corbyn got ousted, but a huge chunk of new Corbyn type MPs, Corbyn supporters, left-wing supporters, are now on the Labour benches. So you do get these kind of insurgency feels to it, and at the moment it does feel, that we've got to recapture the narrative as Conservatives, but actually politics today, politics comes around and goes around. I'm more worried if you look at the world sphere. I mean, if I was Min AF again at the moment, I used to get those calls at 3 a.m. saying, Minister, sorry to disturb you, we've scrambled, we've got 2 bears above Shetland, can we intercept? And that's what I would say when it's an operational job. That's our operational
So that actually happens?
Oh yes, yeah. And I've done that on many a time. You go back to sleep dreaming that you've started World War III. But
do you go back to sleep?
Yeah, you have to. You dream a bit, of course, but you've done your job, and they're doing their job. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, when the time they got a phone call to me, the Bears had probably turned around. But actually, the regulars got when they're doing it again at the moment over the Baltic Sea, where they're challenging NATO, and especially NATO's drones. But that if you're going to do an operational job, that's the job to do.
So, and we've got a veteran in the post at the moment, James Heapy.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah, and he's a slightly different era to me, but he gets it because he's been there, done it, got a T-shirt.
Yeah. And
from my point of view, if you're in the Min AF, I don't know whether he's Deputy Secretary of State. And Theresa May was very formal in the way that she made you a Minister of State and Deputy Secretary of State, because there were other Ministers of State that wouldn't have been deputies. But that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, his operational job is, him and the Secretary of State are the only two that have military advisors, uniform military advisors. Now, considering the MOD is half full of uniforms, yeah, interesting. I've always found that a bit strange.
Yeah. And so, you said ministerial was definitely one of the peaks of your.
I mean, in some jobs I hated, and don't get me wrong. I came back from Northern Ireland as a minister in Northern Ireland, Minister of State in Northern Ireland, and technically got promoted to DWP, Deputy Secretary of State at DWP, with Ian Duncan Smith as the Secretary of State. And I hated it. Every morning I came in, and there were spreadsheets on my desk, Amy and Dell, how much we were giving in benefits and how much it cost us to deliver. That's the Amy and Dell part. And it wasn't about people. And I remember sitting in a car park with my wife. We were going somewhere, and I said, honestly, Angie, I've got to pull over because I'm more worried about it. And I phoned David Cameron on his mobile, Prime Minister, and I said, I just desperately need to talk to you. I'm not happy. I'm going to resign. And he said, I can't talk to you at the moment, Mike, but I'll give you a call back in half an hour. And to be fair to David, he did give me a call back in half an hour, and I explained to him exactly what was going on. And he said, next reshuffle, I'll move you to an operational job. I said, no, you don't have to do that, I'll go. And he went, no, I want to keep you. And I went to do police and criminal justice.
So he was a pretty good people manager in that sense, David Cameron.
I think if you were dead straight with David and George Osborne, George was very much the political brains of it.
Yeah, they were the team, right? A bit like you talk about Blair and Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they were created as the antidote to Blair and Brown. I know that sounds ridiculous. You didn't, get a test tube and create something, but in politics, it was created for that reason. And to be fair, he moved me to. I did police and justice. So I did 2 departments at once, and then actually I brought fire into the Home Office. So I did three departments at once.
Yeah, I remember that actually, and we're seeing that kind of replication with the police and crime commissioner roles, and a lot of them taking on the fire brief.
Well, I messed up there. So you have to, in life, you have to admit when you got things wrong. So I took the legislation through for the police and crime commissioners to bring, well, it should be all blue light. I'm passionate about what, a blue light ambulance is a different ambulance to doing a taxi service for the patients going back and forth to the hospital. They should be separated. We don't train enough together at incidents. So one of the arguments I made to Cameron and to Theresa May, who was the Home Secretary at the time, is that we needed to really bring the blue lights together. So one of the ways of doing that was obviously through police and crime commissioners, and I should have put an amendment in at committee which made it there had to be a reason not to do it rather than a reason to do it. So because local councils, county councils, and don't want to give up their power base, and so they've made it very difficult for, in my case in Hertfordshire, it's been very difficult for David Lloyd to actually bring fire in. Because it was, we could take the money to the police. It was nothing to do with that. The budgets were actually ring fenced. What it should have been around is actually what's the best service. And in parts of the country, we have fire stations with police stations in together.
Yeah.
And it works.
It saves money, better value for money, that operational coordination.
I cocked up. And the civil service didn't put the amendments to me, but actually, let's not blame the civil service. You blame the minister. The minister takes responsibility. There will have to be an amendment going forward in the next few years to actually give that ability and then actually sort out the blue light ambulance situation as well.
You mentioned the committee stage of a bill there, right? Explain a little bit about how that works. And
what happens is that you say you've got a manifesto commitment to do X. Doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be a manifesto commitment. It might be a reaction to dog attacks or someone shootings or something like that. So you bring legislation through it, so you get a first reading, which is just where it's printed. Second reading means that the House of Commons or the House of Lords does that first. And then from there, it goes into committee. It could go up into the corridors in this place, and so people are selected to go under that committee. Or it can be done on the floor of the House for emergency legislation, or if it's finance, it's done that way. And there you go through line by line, trying to make sure the legislation is fit for purpose. The argument I had in my civil service is that we wasn't strong enough in making things happen, and I just didn't win that argument in time. So it comes out of committee, goes to report stage on the floor of the House. Normally takes half a day for that, and then it gets third reading, and then it goes to the House of Lords or vice versa, and then it becomes waiting for the King's signature to become law.
Hence your point about the Lords and about Labour's move to...
So you've got the illegal immigration bill at the moment, which is a manifesto commitment to actually try and address this terrible situation. We've got all these people not only coming into the country, but dying trying to get to this country, coming through safe countries to do that. And look, at the end of the day, if you're coming to this country because you're massively persecuted and your life's at risk, then apply for asylum in your first port of call. That's safe country. That's what the international laws are. Instead of that, you come all the way through Europe and get someone's being paid a huge amount of money to put them on a boat at risk to them and life and limb. And then we're in a situation though, we've just broke the record for the amount of boats, people on these boats, these ribs coming across. And as we see in the Mediterranean, thousands of them are dying.
Oh.
And then it breaks my heart. And you're saying to the likes of Italy and Spain and Greece, well, look, you're the first safe country. Why are you? Because if you land, once you land and you register, if you've got the ability to move on, that's what happens. They don't need, it's very hard, very hard.
Yeah, and it falls upon people like yourself
it falls on the British people because I've just been to Uxbridge in the last couple of days. There's a by-election in Uxbridge, and it is one of the top things on it. We are soft touch, and we can't. We're a small island. We can't keep taking at a time where we're very close to going into recession, like Germany has done. We've got today the figures were announced on unemployment for first time in years. Where unemployment figures are rising again. We can only do so much, and we've got to look after our own people as well.
And being compassionate,
that balance is really very, very hard.
Yeah.
I've got 2,000 people in hotels in my constituency who are asylum seekers. A lot of them from Afghanistan, which we took quite rightly because they were at risk. I get that, what we did for Afghanistan and Hong Kong and places like that. I've got nobody in hotels from Hong Kong, but I've got asylum seekers in most of my not smaller hotels, and one is my Holiday Inn travel lodge hotels, they're full of asylum seekers. My constituents are saying, well, there's 4,000 people on my housing waiting list, inappropriately housed. What are we doing?
Yeah.
It's a big issue for people. And we want to be compassionate. We want to take people that are whose lives at risk. But the economic migrant situation is, someone has paid these people traffickers a lot of money to bring them all the way through Europe and put them on these boats. Where's that money coming from? All right, people will say they're desperate from the country they're coming from. But actually, if you look at the figures on this, a lot of them are coming from Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is not a rich country, but it's a nuclear power. It gets a huge amount of aid from our country. So what is going on there, which is encouraging people to leave Pakistan, come all that way through Africa, across the Med, across Europe, and end up here.
International problem needs an international solution, but it's having domestic implications.
Right down to the minutiae. And literally, if you knock on the door, all right, look, these things are brought to the forefront in by-elections and general elections. But in my correspondence, I get both sorts of correspondence. We need to be more compassionate. We need to do this. But the vast majority of it is you've got to stop it. You've got to stop the sheer volume of people coming into the country, because and a lot of the correspondence is actually coming from the ethnic minorities that are living here as well, because they realise that this is going to have a knock-on effect on people's communication with them.
Attitudes.
Yeah. It's really worrying.
It is really worrying. So you're entering stage, or exiting stage left from politics soon. As a Knight of the Realm, having served as a minister, those years of service, I've kind of two questions really. What's next? And because I don't imagine you're going to be sat there on the sofa, or be allowed to sit there on the sofa, quite frankly. And the second one is, how would that young Guardsman think about where you've ended up now? Would he actually believe it?
My mum is still around. Very much. So my mum is very much a matriarch. So she's 87 years of age. She's gone through unbelievable things during her life, including recently with, she might be saying she's had breast cancer and she's physically recovered really well. But she regularly sits down and says to me, said, your granddaddy would be so proud of you, or this, or something. And I say, Mum, are you proud of me?
Yeah.
Because I'm very proud of myself, of what I've achieved. And then I've got two daughters who have done remarkably well in their own careers. One of them is a school teacher. She's never going to be rich, but her job satisfaction, even though she moans about it all the time, job satisfaction, she just loves what she does aspirationally for these kids.
Means something.
So if I've helped in some shape or form, whether I served at Northern Ireland to help try and keep the peace, or Northern Ireland when I was the minister there, I brought the G8 summit there, which was interesting. I mean, I don't think George Osborne realised just how much it was going to cost to bring the G8 summit to Lough Erne, but I was told to do it, so we did it, and keep everybody safe. I have a picture behind me of shaking hands with President Obama. I've got a very similar one of President Putin, which I keep locked away. I don't want any graffiti on it. And I greeted all the world leaders to the G8 summit. But that is insignificance in compared to a little girl came to see me who had a really rare skin condition where her skin, she gets, just touch her and it blisters and the skin peels away. She needed a specialist sort of home to live in. She'd been knocked back by housing associations and councils, and in the next couple of weeks I'll go and visit her and her parents in that specially adapted home with a really special technical kit, which is unbelievable, because that's changed her life. And it's the little things, the little tiny things that, to me, I sound like a big softie now after being, a squatty for all those years, but that's the bit that makes a difference. If you make a difference to people's lives, real difference, made a difference in the province, made a difference, I hope, to our armed forces, but probably little things like that makes life worthwhile.
And how will you replicate that feeling?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Watch your space.
I'm very passionate around. I've been involved in the prescribed medical use of cannabis, where the opioids and other things haven't worked for these kids that have these specialist seizures. I'm going to continue to try and help in that area. I don't know. There'll be plan to go. don't plan after you've gone is the answer. I announced 18 months ago I was going to leave Parliament. I wanted more colleagues to announce they're going to retire so we could give proper choices into the associations rather than leaving it to the last minute. And then you just get parachuted in with three individuals. I don't know. Just wait and see. Watch this space.
And is your mum proud?
Oh, yeah. She would never say so. But you can see her face. She watches me on telly. So, I saw you on the TV the other day, and I said, well, I recorded that a couple of months ago. So she said, well, life's full of experiences, and I've got a few more to go yet, I think.
So, Mike Penning, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you for your service, in and out of uniform. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll watch this space. What's next?
Thank you very much.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.